There's a version of leadership that looks exceptional from the outside and can feel quietly expensive on the inside. You're composed, you're reliable, you're the one who doesn't wobble, the one who can absorb pressure without letting it spill into the room. You're not burnt out, you're not failing, you're functioning at a high level. And yet sometimes at around 3:07 a.m., you find your eyes wide open. You're wired and tired, alert but not in crisis. Your mind scanning tomorrow before the sun is up. By morning, no one's going to know that you've been awake since 3 a.m. You'll show up polished, capable, unflappable. In this episode, we're not talking about burnout. We're not talking about doing less. We're talking about something far more structural. We're talking about what happens when leadership looks strong, but it's not biologically coherent. We're talking about cortisol rhythms, anticipation chemistry, and the quiet cost of constant composure. And we're talking about the new standard, coherent leadership, and why anything less is ultimately unsustainable. If you've ever wondered why you can handle everything during the day, but your body just won't fully power down at night, stay with me. Because by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly what's happening and what it means for the way that you lead. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome to Project Joyful, the podcast for health-centered leaders. Project Joyful is a space for conversations at the intersection of leadership, health, and lived experience. Here we explore what it means to lead in ways that honor your body, protect long-term capacity, and support a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. This episode is part of the Biology of Leadership series. In this series, we explore leadership through your body, not as a performance to optimize or a mindset to fix, but as a biological experience shaped over time. Leadership doesn't just live in decisions, strategies, or roles. It lives in your nervous system and how responsibility is held and how reliability and care quietly organize your body long before you're consciously aware of it. These conversations are for leaders who are capable, trusted, and effective, and who are curious about how leadership is experienced internally, not just how it performs externally. There's nothing you need to do as you listen, no insight you need to apply. This is simply an invitation to understand what's been shaping your experience of leadership beneath the surface, and what's become possible when biology becomes part of the conversation. Let's begin, shall we? So up until now, there's been a version of leadership that rewards the unflappable one, the woman who doesn't visibly waver, the one who can hold pressure without letting it spill into the room, the one who keeps going when things get tight, or who stays composed when others get reactive, who pushes through without making it anyone else's problem. And she built credibility this way. She earned respect this way. She became indispensable this way. And for a long time, it worked. Composure became synonymous with capability. Reliability became synonymous with value. Pushing through became the quiet gold standard. And if you were the unflappable one, you didn't just meet that standard. You embodied it. You were the steady voice in the meeting, the calm reply to that urgent email, the one who didn't need much and didn't ask for much. But every leadership model has a ceiling, right? And there comes a point where composure alone is no longer the edge. There's a difference between appearing composed and being coherent. And we're entering an era of leadership where coherence, not constant composure, becomes the new standard. And one of the first places that this shift shows up actually isn't in your performance. It's in your sleep. You go to bed genuinely exhausted. The day was full. Your decisions were sharp. You held the room. You held the standard. You held yourself. And your body's tired. And yet, In the dark, you find yourself with your eyes wide open. You turn slightly, check out the clock. Ah, fabulous. It's 3:07 a.m. There's that small internal groan as you look at that time, knowing, great, 3 hours until the alarm goes off. You're not refreshed. You're wired and tired. Your mind begins scanning automatically. Tomorrow's meeting, that sentence you replay, the email you reread, just in case. Nothing dramatic, just alert, just on. By morning, you're still functioning. You shower, you've dressed, you've led, you've responded. No one will know you've been awake since 3 o'clock this morning. But something in your system never fully powered down. And when that becomes a pattern, it stops feeling like an interruption and it starts feeling like you're normal. Now, when I say dysregulated cortisol, I don't mean cortisol when I say dysregulated cortisol, I don't mean cortisol's bad. I think cortisol's had a really bad rap, right? But cortisol is essential. In a healthy rhythm, it rises gently before you wake. That's called the cortisol awakening response. It peaks shortly after you get up, helping you to feel alert and capable. And then it gradually tapers across the day and reaches its lowest point at night so you can drop into deep, restorative sleep. Now that rhythm's intelligent. It's elegant. It's designed for performance and recovery. But when your system is living in ongoing hypervigilance, even if it's subtle hypervigilance, that rhythm can shift. And sometimes the timing shifts. Cortisol pulses earlier in the night or when you're asleep. And that can wake you between 2 and 4 in the morning because cortisol mobilizes glucose and that increases alertness. And sometimes it's about the baseline, right? Instead of fully tapering, cortisol never quite stands down. So your system hovers in low-grade activation, not in crisis mode, but just ready, just in case. And in longer-standing stress patterns, the curve can flatten altogether. Morning energy drops, evening wired and tired feelings increase. The clear rise and fall signals become blurred. So when we talk about dysregulated cortisol, we're not talking about something dramatic or defective. We're talking about rhythm integrity. Cortisol released at the wrong time or rising higher than's really needed or lingering for longer than it should. The chemistry itself isn't the problem. It's the pattern. And when the pattern shifts, restoration becomes partial. Sleep becomes lighter. Recovery becomes incomplete. And this is where coherent leadership begins. So coherence in its most simplest terms is about alignment. It's when what's happening inside you matches what's happening outside you. There's that alignment. So your physiology, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, they're all moving in the same direction. There's no internal split between the role you're holding and the state that your body's in. Now, incoherence is when you appear calm, but your system's mobilized. So you might look composed on the outside, but inside your chemistry is preparing for threat. So like when your title says senior leader, but your nervous system's still working to secure its position. Coherent leadership is the shift from performing capability to really inhabiting it. Now, your brain's always going to scan. That's its job. It's constantly assessing for safety, status, and belonging. The difference isn't whether scanning happens. The difference is whether your system remains in anticipatory mobilization long after that demand is passed. So when your internal state and your external responsibility align, your body receives a different signal. Activation becomes proportional. It rises when it's needed. It falls when it isn't. There's effort and then there's stand down. There's output and then there's recovery. Coherence signals safety to your body. Not because the pressure's disappeared, mind you. Not because expectation has lowered, but because you're no longer reaching to prove you can handle it. You're handling it from a place where capacity is already assumed. Can you feel the difference in that? Proving requires vigilance. It anticipates evaluation. It keeps scanning for how you're being perceived. Handling comes from ownership. It assumes position. And your nervous system responds differently to these two states. So when that shift occurs, rhythm begins to restore itself. Cortisol rises when it's useful and it falls when it's no longer needed. Your sleep deepens because mobilization is no longer being rehearsed in the dark. Delegation becomes cleaner because control is no longer standing in for safety. Rest stops feeling risky because your body trusts that standing down isn't equal to losing relevance. So that unflappable model relied on constant composure. The coherent model relies on internal congruence. One sustains performance, the other sustains physiology. And here's the thing. Leadership that isn't biologically coherent is unsustainable. It may look successful on the outside. It may even be celebrated. But if the internal rhythms misaligned, if activation never fully resolves, if restoration remains partial, that cost is accumulating quietly. So coherence isn't a luxury. It's structural. So what does this actually look like in practice? Coherent leadership isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's the difference between walking into a high-stakes meeting having written out 3 versions of what you might say based on every imagined objection in the room, and walking in with preparation but without that rehearsal. You've done the thinking. You know the material, but you trust that the words will come. Your nervous system's alert, but it's not braced. Your thoughts are organized, but they're not racing. There's no internal performance running alongside the conversation. You're present to what's actually being said, and the people in the room can feel that. Oh, how about this one? So it's 8:47 p.m., glass of wine in hand, and the laptop's technically closed. You tell yourself you're off the clock. But in the unflappable model, part of you's still reviewing the day, recalculating a decision, drafting tomorrow's response in the background. Whereas in coherent leadership, when you close the laptop, you feel it. Your shoulders drop. Your jaw softens. Your breathing slows. There's a clean line between work and restoration. The day doesn't follow you into the evening. Or it could show up as delegating and not reopening that document at 9:23 p.m. to check it just one more time. Not because you don't care, but because oversight is no longer standing in for safety. You trust your leadership position. You trust your team. And your body trusts that letting go doesn't equal losing control. It's when you're waking before your alarm because you feel rested, not because your chemistry has mobilized you. Your body feels heavy and open in a good way, warm, clear. There's no immediate mental sprint. Energy feels steady rather than urgent. Coherent leadership doesn't dull your edge, it refines it. Decision-making becomes cleaner because it's not being distorted by that background vigilance. Presence becomes steadier because it's not maintained by effort. Authority becomes quieter because it's no longer compensating for internal activation. Now, there's still pressure. There are still deadlines. There are still complex personalities and competing demands. That's leadership. But activation rises and falls with the moment. It resolves. It doesn't linger. It doesn't accumulate quietly in your physiology. That's the new standard. So for a long time, being unflappable was an advantage. It helped you rise. It helped you stabilize teams. It helped you carry responsibility without leaking pressure into the room. It worked. But every strategy has a threshold. There comes a point where what once elevated you begins to extract from you. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. In your sleep, in your energy, and the subtle vigilance that never quite powers down. And this is the moment where leadership gets to evolve. Not by lowering standards, but by raising them. Not by doing less, but by aligning more precisely. Not by abandoning strength, but by refining it. Coherent leadership's not a personality shift. It's not a new strategy layered on top of the old one. It's biological realignment. It's the decision to lead in a way that your physiology can sustain. Because leadership that isn't biologically coherent, it's unsustainable, no matter how impressive it looks from the outside. If you've recognized yourself anywhere in this conversation, not in crisis, not in collapse, but in subtle activation, then know that this isn't a problem to fix. It's simply a pattern to refine. And next week, I'm going to talk about what happens when the strategies that once worked so well simply stop delivering the same return. For now, the invitation's simple. Notice your rhythm. Notice where you're proving. Notice where you're already capable. And begin to feel the difference. Because that difference is the new standard. I'm sending you lots of love. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for listening to today's podcast. Can I ask you a favour? If our conversation spoke to you today, could you please take a moment to leave a 5-star review? Your review will help people discover this podcast, and together we can create a world where there's even more love and more laughter. And if you want to hear more from the Project Joyful podcast, just click the subscribe button. Bye for now.